Our speakers today are going to be discussing business opportunities, related consulting services, security, banking and funding, packaging, construction, and more. So what we're going to do is we're just going to have each of the panelists introduce themselves, talk about what they're bringing to the conversation, and then we're just going to open up to the floor. I know people have quite a few questions, and we'll get a good discussion going. So without further ado, Deepak, why don't you start, and we'll just come down this way.
Sure. I was on a panel this morning. I'll quickly introduce myself again. Deepak Anand. I'm the Vice President of Government Relations at Cannabis Compliance. We are a consulting company that helps people get licensed under the ACMPR federally, as well as dealing with provincial licenses now. We've been quite engaged on all facets of the industry, from recruitment to auditing to training. Looking forward to the panel.
Hello, can you hear me okay? Hear me? My name is Derek Ingraham. I'm the manager of client development at Chandos Construction. We're an Alberta general contractor, medium-sized. We do about 500 million a year in the province of Alberta and Canada as well. We're doing a few facilities for some various LPs and some in planning as well. So here to answer any technical questions that way.
Hi. Hello, my name is Max Herrera. I'm with ATB Financial. I'm one of the directors with their group and one of the people who spearheaded the cannabis strategy. And I'm here to ask any questions that you might have. For many of those who were able to attend the lunch, as Bruce mentioned, we think that the banking sector is lacking. So we're trying to fill that gap for entrepreneurs. So thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Bromley. I work at ColorAd Packaging. I joined their team back in January 2017. Prior to that, I was in the group insurance industry, and I consulted for ColorAd, and we saw where this industry was headed and brainstormed how we could start servicing the industry. So ColorAd's been in the packaging industry for 20 years, providing food packaging, food-grade safe packaging to Hershey's, Mondelez, Kraft, Lindt, Ghirardelli. Our booth is on the back there, and you can see some samples. But we are now in the cannabis industry and are fully U.S. and Canadian regulated, and happy to answer any of your questions.
I'd like to start off, actually. I have a question about packaging and what you see from a manufacturer standpoint. What are some of the challenges of addressing the needs of the industry without necessarily knowing exactly what you need to adhere to yet?
Excellent question. That was actually something I was going to table to the crowd to say, for the recreational market, how many of you actually know exactly what your packaging is going to look like, down to the very last graphic and last font written? I would be shocked if anyone put up their hand, because we're still not 100% concrete. Like, for example, you're putting up your hand saying, yes, you know for sure. So you are knowing whether or not a stand-up pouch could have a window in it or not? So there are some people who obviously going routes where there isn't as much phase and fog in the round, but we are flexible packaging, so we don't provide any jars or plastic jars. We only do provide a stand-up flexible pouch. We feel for transportation costs, cost alone of just the minimized material being used, we are an affordable, great option. And there are still some answers for our product that have yet to be answered. In saying that, we have gone through the poison prevention package test of the CPSC, and we are known and given the approval, lab certified from a law firm out of the US, that it does meet the Poison Prevention Packaging Act.
Deepak, I have a question for you. With CCI's experience and your experience working on a national level, you're hearing from applicants in different provinces, different demands, different audiences, and I'm curious what is unique in your experience about Alberta. What sorts of unique questions and business ideas are people bringing to you that you're not seeing in other provinces?
Yeah, it's a great question. So certainly in Alberta, in terms of retail, the number one question seems to be just around municipalities and what they have to say and licensing around municipalities. And that's an interesting question, and we're getting a lot of questions from even just municipal officials looking at what are the federal regulations, help us understand what we need to put into place. And so We're certainly getting a lot of questions around real estate and regulating real estate, but the Alberta model, is a very interesting one where online is going to be controlled entirely by the AGLC, but the private distribution, there's no limit on number of stores. So that's the other one where there's a lot of interested parties saying, we want to get into store, we want to apply for one, help us understand that process. And I think Alberta's done a great job in their framework of regulating and rolling out a practical framework from what we've seen compared to many other provinces, particularly on the non-medical retail side.
Chris, do you have any thoughts on that as well?
Sorry, first name's Derek.
You're looking at him.
Yes.
Can you repeat the question?
Just your experience with what is unique about the Alberta landscape that you aren't seeing in other provinces?
Well, I mean, it's in part it's our culture. We're producers by nature in many different ways, and I think we've translated that into producing a new product, and that rigor is certainly showing in some of our client base. There's a lot of entrepreneurial spirit and a lot of forward thought as well. So.
For someone who's looking to enter either the retail space or other aspects, cultivation, processing, in Alberta in the future, what are some of the unknowns in terms of federal regulations and provincial regulations that they need to be paying attention to? And this is for all you guys.
Well, in terms of regulation, I won't be able to really comment on that. I'm a general contractor by nature, so I can help you with the development end of it, but certainly permitting is a challenge. Health Canada component, if that is part of the facility that's being constructed. Local zoning, I understand that to be a challenge as well. So these are ongoing.
And what are some of the issues what are some of the steps they can take to prepare for those issues, like liaising with municipalities to understand what their zoning regulations might be?
Well, I guess the biggest piece of advice I could offer in terms of development is hiring a strong team early. So as soon as the project, project inception, when an LP believes that there's a project, bring in an architect as soon as possible, bring in a general contractor as soon as possible, a construction management company, to start some of the planning process. Often there's an expected production date and a revenue earning date at the back end of these, and often the planning in the initial stages doesn't consider that date and working towards it. So team would be my comment for sure.
So I'm going to turn the questions over to the audience now, but I want to get a sense of everyone in the room. Who here is looking to operate within the retail space or the cultivation space in Alberta in the future? So pretty much everyone in the room. So what are the types of questions on everyone's mind then? And we'll turn it over to the floor. So just raise your hand if you have any questions. But we have a lot of experts on stage. I'm sure you have a lot of questions. So what are the challenges in your mind for entering this space? Don't all jump up at once. Can you pass the microphone back?
This is a question for Derek. I don't know if you know, but are retailers going to be able to apply for building permits if they don't have the proper zoning or use yet? So essentially, are you even going to be able to start building if you have a lease, if the city hasn't zoned the area properly?
I think it was, are you able to start building when you have zoning but not building permit? Is that right? Oh. That's complicated. I'd leave that. And so this is a city Calgary question, I think. Every city is different. Every authority having jurisdiction is different. Every county. So that, to translate to the crowd, that'll change depending on where your project is. But I would suggest interacting with the permitting body as early as possible to get these questions answered. I think if you've got an interior designer or an architect you're working with, and you're working towards permitting, this is a question to ask them immediately. If you've got a construction manager, this is something that they should be helping you with as well, and really spearheading. And if you don't have a construction manager, maybe you should call me.
Hello? I'm sorry. I just have a question around the grow lights. Are there any specific certifications that they require? Are those certifications going to be standardized, or the current ones will apply?
Sorry, I don't think we can
Can't hear the
you.
question really well.
Oh.
Sorry, can you speak a little bit louder?
Yeah, for sure. I was talking about the grow lights, so the lights that actually grow the cannabis. I was wondering if there are any certifications around it, if they have to be NFS, for example, certified, hazard certified, or the current ones will apply, or
I can't, we can't.
David, could you repeat the question if you understood what the question was?
I'm talking about the grow lights. I'm asking about the required certifications for the grow lights. Are there going to be any specific requirements?
So he's curious if there's going to be any specific certification for any grow lights that would be used in a cultivation facility.
There's no planned certification. I mean, we certainly know a lot of people are moving towards both LED and HPS in the space, particularly on a commercial level. There's some very sophisticated LED and HPS systems and companies that we're working with. But as far as certification, there's some LEED certification and basic stuff, but there's no real cannabis industry certification around lighting specifically that I've seen.
Hello? This question might actually be for David. I'm wondering when it comes to the health and safety within the cultivation facilities, what sort of standards exist, or does Health Canada govern that? So similar to the CFA managing food production safety standards?
Similar, yeah. And in fact, I'd pass this over to Deepak because the CCI has a lot of experience helping facilities pass that testing. So
Commercially, to be a licensed producer, there's a number of requirements they need to fulfill from a safety perspective. There's a detailed safety and security plan that you're required to submit to Health Canada before you would even sort of consider your application submitted in. It's very detailed on their website. We've got certainly a big package that we do. It's almost 400 pages long in terms of our submission, but there's very, very specific things around security and safety that you need to keep in mind if you want to be a licensed producer under the ACMPR. There's changes being proposed to the ACMPR to be a micro producer and be a standard LP. We suspect that there will be changes around those restrictions on security, but there's definitely a lot of information out there from Health Canada.
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up. When it comes to maintaining the facilities as well, are there specific standards that they need to adhere to?
Absolutely. So you're required as part of your quality management system to give to Health Canada all your SOPs. Your SOPs, there's detailed SOPs around safety and security and sanitation that you're required to fulfill on a regular basis. There's daily checks that you're required to do. Health Canada has inspections that they do almost once a month. That they look very closely at your security and cleaning and cleanliness and sanitization logs to ensure that your quality management system ensures that the crop that you're producing and eventually the medicine that you're producing meets the different testing and safety requirements that Health Canada has set out on a federal level. Because if you don't meet those requirements from a safety perspective, there is a jeopardy to the health and safety of Canadians and also as a result to your license. So as part of safeguarding and protecting your ACMPR federal license, there are restrictions in place that certainly talk to safety and security, and we can talk offline. There's a lot of those services that we provide to licensed producers and soon to microprocessors coming online as well.
This question's for Max. It looks like ATB is here. They're willing to support this new industry and its growth. With respect to financing what I guess some people might consider unconventional business, is the application process to secure funding similar to what a normal business would be, or are there additional layers that are added to this process?
Well, thank you. Well, I think at the end of the day, for us, a loan is a loan. Given that this industry is something that we're not as well versed as others, we probably ask you for a little more due diligence than in other transactions. But in terms of a client applying for financing with us, you wouldn't find any other difference than if you were applying for something different. My advice, and one of the things that I think we get a lot of comfort is when you do your due diligence, and in terms of, you have a firm like, maybe CCI engaged for the licensing, or you have a contractor, that makes a big difference in the financial application.
Just if I can add on the financing side, I think ATB is doing a good job on financing. We've seen some recent announcements, but Alterna Credit Union has been in the space for years doing traditional lending, and we're certainly seeing obviously the Canacords and all of those sort of guys that have been providing financing for some time. The one thing I would add is BMO has gotten into the financing game in a very big way. They're looking at late stage LPs, but certainly BMO and the mainstream banks are looking at this quite closely as well.
Any other questions?
This is going to be for the food industry kind of question. I'm not sure who to direct this to. But will there be any restrictions towards cannabis accessories given away with delivery for a restaurant food order? Let's say I gave away a pipe with free pizza delivery.
Sorry, repeat the question one more time.
Let's say I gave away a free cannabis pipe with a pizza delivery order. Is there any restrictions on anything like that?
Paraphernalia, I mean, accessories, I don't see huge restrictions at this point. I know some provinces have very specific restrictions. Example, in BC, it's absolutely not permitted when you get into licensed retail, free to be able to do that. But as far as handing things out with free with non-cannabis associated things or that wouldn't be regulated under the cannabis system, I can't see, as long as there's no cannabis in it, I can't see it being a massive issue.
Maybe this would be more geared toward banking, but I'm just wondering that it being a newer industry, if anybody knows of any grants that are out there yet to get businesses started. There's always employee grants out there, those kind of things, just to get people.
On the federal level, so far from what we've seen, given that we are in the production business, we've been in the production growing business for 4 years now. We've seen ACOA, which is the Agricultural Credit Union of Canada, do some grants. We've seen FCC, which is the Farm Credit Canada Association, again federally, handing out grants for production and cultivation. There's certainly a lot of provincial grants that are available. I'm not familiar with very many Alberta grants, but I've done a lot of work in BC and New Brunswick, and there are specific grants that you can negotiate with the provincial government. But on a federal level, I know ACOA and Farm Credit Canada are certainly handing out some grants.
Derek, if someone's going to come to you and wants to develop a cultivation or processing facility, what are some of the aspects of developing those facilities that are unique, not existent in other industries?
Well, there's a lot of requirements, and I'm sure Deepak will be able to chime in also. But relating to power distribution, access to electricity is a focus, of course. Water, transportation hubs, things like this. So site selection becomes, a question. If we're already advanced through site selection, they've got a site in mind. It comes down to what their intention is in terms of the facility's final use. So are they intending to prepare it for recreational, or is it just going to be a medicinal facility? And in terms of in both cases, likely some of the same inherent challenges exist with every one of these facilities. So it's a very warm facility. It's very humid. It's conducive to mold growth and things like that. So HVAC is one of the largest concerns, and of course, and then secondary is electrical for sure.
What do you think is more cost-effective and just practical? Is purpose-built facility or retrofitting an existing facility?
That's a tricky one. We're seeing both in the market. There's some greenfield sites that are being purpose-built, and there's a lot of opportunity to be able to control things like structure height, where if it's an existing facility, a warehouse might have a 40-foot ceiling that you just don't need in grow space. So there's unique challenges and opportunities with each. It depends on the structure. Potentially an investor's got a building they own, they want to use, so that might be more attractive to that group. The list goes on. Ideally, a facility's built for its specific purpose. So In a lot of cases, these facilities are retrofitting. We're developing more or less a building within a building. And without going into specific detail, it becomes some of these systems are a little bit redundant as they relate to potentially a purpose-built facility. So there's for and against. I can argue both sides for sure. So.
Deepak, I'm wondering if we are going to see other extraction facilities besides CO2 extraction becoming legal. What you can predict will it be a safety issue? Yeah, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. We get a lot of questions around extraction. So whilst different forms of extraction other than CO2, like butane particularly, are not expressly prohibited from the ACMPR currently, there are systems and the quality management systems that you need to have in place from a safety perspective, from ensuring that there's no resin and remnants in product. There's very strict conditions. I don't know if any LP that has extraction facilities outside of CO2. What I do know is that there's something called a licensed dealer category, which is a research and development license. I know of at least one facility that has a butane extraction system set up that's licensed by Health Canada at the moment. But remember, that's only for research and development purposes under butane. I know butane is very, very common in the US states. We've certainly seen ethanol very common as well in the US. And I suspect that Health Canada is not going to permit a lot of those forms once they sort of try and understand where this is going. But if you can argue to them that butane is a safe solvent or there's any other solvents that are safe, I certainly think there's a case to be made there. There's nothing in the regulations, again, that prevent from that. So there's this misconception that you can't do butane extractions. I don't think that's completely true. I think if you can demonstrate to Health Canada that there's safety there and that there's ways around going to do that, there's an argument you can make to that end.
Anyone else? We've got a good 5 minutes left if anyone has any more questions.
If it's okay, David, I'm actually going to pose a question back to the front row. With your packaging, are you in the Ontario market? No. Okay. That makes sense then. Thanks. I guess I'll build on that as we walk to the other question. There's a question David said, if you're getting involved as a retailer or a grower, is there anything you should be aware of? And I guess one important note is that each province has different models. So when you're trying to make decisions like your packaging, you might want to be sure if your plan is to kind of service all provinces in coast to coast, ensure that your packaging does meet every province's standards and regulations. And currently some of them aren't finalized yet, which is going back to my first statement of not having most packaging concrete yet because we still are waiting for some answers from some provinces.
Hi, my question is for Deepak there. If you want to start a cultivation facility specifically for the recreational market, is Health Canada the one that issues your license, or will you have to get a license separate from the Alberta government or from the AGLCA for cultivation?
Sorry, can you repeat the last part of your question? So if you want to apply for a
So like if you want to cultivate for the recreational market specifically, will the Alberta government or the AGLCA be issuing you a cultivation license, or do you still have to get it primarily from Health Canada?
No. Production is going to be controlled on a federal level. There's absolutely no intervention that provincial governments have as far as production for medical purposes is concerned today. Under non-medical purposes, we know that control is going to remain with the federal government. So there's certainly the licensed producer now that works under the ACMPR. That's going to change to a microprocessor. We don't know what the definition of a microprocessor is going to be in terms of, is it going to be canopy amounts, is it going to be square footage, is it going to be yield? But there's certainly going to be that matrix that Health Canada puts in to determine what's defined as a micro cultivator or processor. But that license is certainly going to be federal. Now, there will be different categories of licenses that Health Canada grants you. So you can be a microprocessor, and then you can have a federal sale license for non-medical, or even for medical as a result of that. But that's something that the government does not have in its control at all. Where they do have control, though, just so you understand, is municipal governments need to approve zoning before you can apply to a federal government. So I just want to make that very clear. So the municipality has control over that. So the municipality says, no, we're not happy with you on our lands, you will not get that cultivation license, and that's not going to change. But production is going to be controlled federally, very much.
Thank you.
I think I saw one more question over here, or No. Okay, I'm going to do a quick survey of the audience. So everyone, just about everyone, raised their hands when I asked who is looking to be in this industry in some aspect. So I'm curious how many are interested in getting into the retail space? And how many are interested in getting into the commercial cultivation space? Commercial processing space? Okay, interesting. So a lot of retail, a good bit of cultivation, and a little bit of processors. And how many people here are either are currently medical growers personally? Okay, so a little smattering. So a good cross-section of all the different aspects of production and cultivation. So no more questions? We've got time for probably one more question from the audience. You, sir?
Pot stocks. How many people here own pot stocks?
And how many people here are invested in the space? Actually, not too many. No? A lot more retailers. Interesting. Any final comments from the panel?
I guess I'll just add, no one asked about regulations for packaging, so I just will throw it out there. The Food and Drug Regulation does require that packaging be child resistant. In order for it to abide by the child resistant, it needs to have one of three regulations, one being Canada Standards Association, one being the European standards, and one being the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission standards. So when you are getting your packaging, do ask your provider for what certification they have and for proof of that certification.
So since a lot of the panelists are actually, the audience is looking at retail, I just want to highlight some of the things I said in the morning for some of you that were not there potentially, is that there's a real opportunity here for Alberta retailers to set themselves up because there's not very many provinces, particularly Ontario and Quebec, that are permitting for retail. So I think there's a massive opportunity here to be able to set yourselves up correctly for when those markets open up, because you know Ontario is going into an election. This is an election issue in Ontario. It's a matter of time before this gets taken away from the LCBO in Ontario, and this is a good opportunity for you to position yourselves for those markets that are going to open up. And I'm looking at Quebec and Ontario in a very big way. So I just want to kind of mention that as something to go out for.
Do you think there's any relevance or poignancy to the disparity between how ready Alberta seems and how far behind neighboring British Columbia seems?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think we're certainly seeing that significant sort of shift between understanding, even just basic understanding of federal regulations between what Alberta's got and I think what New Brunswick's had for some time now compared to what BC and certainly Ontario and Quebec have on that side of things. So I think there's a fundamental disconnect between some of these provinces, and I see that even more in municipalities. What concerns me a little bit about BC is that I don't think the municipalities understand all of the federal and provincial regulations completely, and they're being thrown in to make decisions around permitting and licensing in absence and complete vacuum of that federal regulation. I mean, I get calls daily from municipalities across BC and Alberta just asking to understand more about the federal regulations. What can we do? What can we regulate? And I think this is being thrown on them, right? Now you've got a room full of people, asking municipalities, can we do this? And municipalities don't understand, what they can regulate, what is best policy. And on that side, I think City of Calgary's done a really good job understanding federal policy and proposing some bylaw changes.
What do you think the municipalities need? What can be given to the municipalities to help them better understand the steps they can take now?
So, there is a provincial territorial working group that works between the federal government's Cannabis Legalization Regulation Secretariat and the provinces and territories, but there isn't a municipal working group that understands those same challenges. So I think one of the suggestions that I would have is for municipalities to get engaged with the provincial bodies that are on that committee to try and understand what's happening on a federal level as well as a provincial level.
Okay, let's have a round of applause for our panel. Thanks for coming out, gentlemen. Our next panel is going to be coming up at 3 p.m., Investing in Cannabis, so stick around for that.